And we'll take a couple valves out for you so you can get an idea of what things look like. Now this particular transmission has these little plates in here. Now there's usually a spring on the back that will hold up against that plate. So you kind of got to go in there, push against the spring, grab the plate, hold your finger in the hole because the spring will come shooting out, and then you've lost parts and got them confused, which ain't ever any fun. Let's see if we can get a valve out, and it's coming. This goes on there. You take these valves out, keep them in line just as they came out. Something I like to do. Now this valve went in this bore right here. Give you an idea of how hydraulics work is fluid will come in around the lands of these valves and will actually either act on it in one direction or act on it in another direction, or the valve is manually held by some linkage and it will move the valve, and then fluid will be directed into a specific channel. Like say that valve moves up right there, fluid will flow through that channel, or if it moves up there, it will move through that channel, or if it moves down, then it's opened up other channels. And gives you a little illustration of how spool valves work. They direct fluid and oil, or they act on another valve which directs fluid and oil, or act on each other. We got this valve out, we showed you that. Now there's a few more valves in this. What we're going to do is take all of them out, clean the valve body, get all the dirt and grime out of it, because that can hang valves up and cause problems. So we're going to get it all cleaned up, and then we'll be back to show you the install. So we've gotten our valve bodies cleaned up, both parts, big half and the little half, and took out all the valves. We've reinstalled them, and we're just going to reinstall this one that we took out for you earlier. And always remember how you took them out so you know how they went back in. You can see through the channel casting spool going into its bore. Put our spring in. Now it sticks out a little bit. We got to compress it while putting in its keeper. Several ways you can do it. It can get tricky. And our little keeper is all set. Make sure it's flush. Sticking out of the body. This is a manual valve. No special things to do to get it out. This is what your detent lever is connected to. So when you want to select drive, it'll move where it needs to be for drive, reverse, manual low, or however your gear selector is set up. As you can see, we're closing off fluid in that channel, allowing it there, closing it there. And if we move it, we'll allow it in different areas. This would be a manual spool valve. It's controlled just by linkage. Others are controlled by hydraulic pressure. Now to give you an idea of how fluid travels in these, take our two halves and just split them. And you got channel casting here and you have channel casting here. An example of how things kind of work. When I direct a valve, say we'll open this big channel casting here. Well, down here we have a matching channel casting, and we'll find it for you. Best that we can. So half of this will make this half a hole. This will direct fluid through the separator plate and into this casting, and it all one big maze of fluid will eventually end up at clutch packs, lubrication pressure, torque converter. Now these channels are, you can kind of compare them to a wiring diagram, except with a liquid. It all actually does the same thing. You got a liquid flowing in, liquid flowing out. It acts like electrical power in some respects. So we got all our valve body clean. We got our spool valves and stuff in the body up here. We're going to start reassembly. Got our hole drilled in our separator plate. We got a little cone-shaped filter here that's going to be installed in this hole here. We have to set it underneath the separator plate. Turn it a certain way so the plate will line up. There we have that. We'll scoot that just over a little bit. This filter isn't going to stay perfect. It will move, but once everything's together, pressure will push that up against that every time and seat it. Next, we're gonna install our new check balls. Now, if you don't remember where your check balls went, your ship kit will usually have a diagram that you can refer to. Every valve body is a little different in places. So you'll look at your letters and just read your instructions like ours. It says if we have a bathtub shaped section. So we don't have a check ball here. This valve body is a little different on the 606. It's not rounded like the A604 is. So that's deleted. We do need one installed at location C, which is right here. And then C is also another location, which is directly across. One will go there. So we got our 3 check balls in their proper locations, C, 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 marked on the ship kit. Now I see there's a question mark on the diagram where an empty hole is for a possible check ball, and we have an empty hole in our valve body where my thumb is. Now they want us to do something here. If this was an A604 or 41TE, do not install a ball. But since we have a 606, 42LE, 42RLE, they want us to install an extra check ball, probably to enhance its performance in some aspect. There's no gaskets for these. These are machined perfectly flat or pretty darn close, and they seal with these 2 plates. Now we don't want to pick up on this valve body and turn it over, because we'll lose our check balls and make a mess. So we're going to do this top plate, match it up, set it all down on top of the check balls. Make sure our holes are lined up here. The filter's not going to give us any trouble. Bring it down. And let it into place. You can look through some bolt holes and make sure you got holes lined up. Get you some bolts in there. And We'll just snug them down by hand at the moment until we get everything put together, and then we'll tighten everything correctly. And a few bolts semi-started in there just to hold it together. Flip it over. And we have our valve body together in that aspect. What we're going to do next is do this 2.4 accumulator. There's an update for it too. On our shift kit is this 2.4 accumulator with its springs. We're going to install a wire expander underneath a new seal on one end of the piston, which would be the closed end on this case. And then we're going to discard the small inner spring. The spring can be a little troublesome to get out. 2 halves to that. Grab us a wire expanders. This fixes leak issues with these, allows them to seal better. Each accumulator is going to get 1 of each. You don't want 2 of these on one accumulator. You won't have enough parts for one, and you run the risk of making it too tight. Let's say reuse it. No, it doesn't. These are our scarf cut seals. They're slotted. They come off real easy to get off. We want the wire expander and a new seal on the closed end of this accumulator. It just goes in like so. Put you a new ring on there. Stagger the opened end of the wire ring and the open end of the scarf cut seal. And then install a new seal on the other end. Now, don't install the open end of the seal on the open end of the accumulator, because it could catch in the bore and tear the seal, cause a leak. You want to stagger it like so. What they've done for the fix here is to eliminate this inner spring because it compresses. What they want to happen is this solid spring, which does not compress, or solid coil, going to go inside of the inner spring. Once this spring compresses down to that, it will not move anymore, so the accumulator won't be constantly pulsating in its bore, and in effect it will actually allow more apply ability to that clutch. And this is the 2.4 accumulator, so it will allow more pressure on the 2.4 clutch. We're going to grease these just like we did everything else. Kind of locks the lips together for a little bit so we don't run the risk of catching them on the edge of the bore and hurting the seal. Grease, once again, it doesn't hurt the transmission. Don't pile on a gallon at a time, but enough to make things easier. This accumulator is going to install on this bore, just like so. They don't fit tight, they're not supposed to. When fluid gets in behind them seals in that wire ring, it'll expand and make a real tight seal. And you can always double check your work, sliding the accumulator in and out. This accumulator will push out against spring pressure and compress the spring, and then after the accumulator it will go to the 2.4 clutch back. In this case, apply to clutch. Next, we're going to have to put back on our external equipment here, such as our rooster comb, parking pole, our pressure transducer, and the electronic pressure control. So these solenoids got O-rings on them. Good time to check, as does EPC. Make sure you got all your dirt off of things. These have to go on together because they use the same hardware to mount them. Now, remove my screws that I saved. Our solenoids and our solenoid and transducer on. Put the bolts on. Lock them down. Now we're going to replace this seal for the 2-4 clutch. And it just presses right down in there. A little grease. Next we're going to put on our rooster comb. It has a tab. It's right down there in the hole. And you can see this manual valve. Do another illustration. This valve moves in and out when needed. It will lock on to the rooster comb here, and it has a channel. We'll cut through that and make that valve move for its different ranges. Sometimes you can miss that and the valve be to the outside and it not grab it, and in theory you put it in gear, it won't do nothing. Always double check. And we're good. Here's your pins for your range selector. See this plastic tab here? Line up with that. See, it's pushing them pins right now. It'll be under tension once we put it back in the case. We'll push all this together so that has good contact. Next is our solenoid bulkhead connector. Plug in your transducer. Reads pressure. And your EPC solenoid. Get your bolt. This is a just big shouldered bolt. Let's see, lets everything turn properly. Make sure everything's good and lined up before you go cranking the bolt down. This will kind of self-align once it gets in the case, so it can float a little bit. Lock it down a little bit. That will float. This will all press together. And we got a new seal for this. We'll yank it off and change it. Round seal for that. See if we can get this one off. Stretched on there pretty good. Now it's a plastic bulkhead connector, so be careful prying on it. Don't want to damage it, and you can see it's tapered. You want the widest portion of the taper to go down. It's a weather packing seal from fluid, basically. Kind of expand that with a screwdriver. Way down. Seal for that. Got our sleeve in there. Next we'll put the rooster comb detent on. And what I mean by detent is this is spring loaded, and we'll push against these little notches in this, what they call a rooster comb in this case. And each time it creates positive movement into each section. If you were to just put this in your car without the locking detent, the valve wouldn't position itself properly in its bore, and you could have some really funky transmission operation. So this locates it basically, and it's under tension. There's no seal that goes on this 2.4 accumulator. Whenever it blows, it will exhaust. It has to bend a little bit and be a little fussy. Bear with it. Put a little pressure on it and it'll go in. Got one started. There you have it. This is what this detent does. It's positive locking engagement for each range, so the valve's located correctly. And you have park, which is the deepest detent, and locks that into the sleeve in the case, thus putting your car in park. This parking pawl is also dampened in the event you slam your car in park while you're still moving at 30 mile an hour, so it can save your parking pawl. Yeah, that's how that works. External parts of the valve body. Stiffening plate here. .41 TEs do not have this plate. Flip our valve body over and see what we got. It looks good. We're going to start installing all of our screws again. Now the outer holes you can see that aren't threaded will bolt back onto the transmission case when that time comes. We've got our solenoid block screen cleaned up. It has tabs that line it up. Set it back down in its little holes. We're going to put our solenoid block on now. Goes in this section of the valve body. And we'll just get a bolt kind of started in there. One there. One there. Get them started and then we'll zip them down. And we have a couple little things to do before we finish up with it. This seal, which is goes on this shaft. The inner diameter is much smaller than the shaft itself. Going to stretch it. Slowly work it in there. Once it gets to the groove, it might be quite tricky to get it properly seated. But in our case, looks like we lucked out. Now it may be a little difficult to get back in the case because we've kind of stretched it, but it may shrink back down. And here you have it. That concludes the valve body cleanup, inspection, and overhaul.